What if I told you the entire narrative you've been fed about the US-Iran nuclear talks, the endless cycles of negotiation, confrontation, and impending crisis? What if it's all a meticulously constructed illusion, a grand play, orchestrated not to prevent a nuclear Iran, but to maintain a very specific kind of power? And what if the very architects of this drama are now caught in a trap of their own making, a gilded cage forged from decades of their own deceptions? Because that, according to a former Pentagon official with direct, unvarnished insight into the deepest machinations of Washington's foreign policy apparatus, is precisely where we stand. This isn't about headlines. It's not about geopolitical chess. This is about something far more fundamental. This is about power itself, about the story that grants that power legitimacy, and what happens when that story starts to unravel. For years, we've been told a clear, simple tale. Iran, the rogue state, the proliferator, the existential threat, and America, the steadfast guardian, tirelessly working to contain it, prevent the unthinkable. A noble struggle, a necessary endeavor, a constant low-burning fire demanding our attention, our resources, our belief. But what if the very structure of these talks, these on-again, off-again diplomatic charades, serves a purpose far beyond non-proliferation? What if the crisis itself is the commodity? What if the constant threat of Iran going nuclear is more valuable to certain entrenched interests than Iran not going nuclear? You see, the official I spoke with didn't mince words. He described a system, a playbook, refined over decades, designed to manage perception as much as policy. He talked about how Washington operates, not in the bright light of public scrutiny, but in the shadows of accepted wisdom, where certain truths become sacrosanct, immune to challenge. And the biggest truth of all, that America must always be the indispensable nation, always have a clear adversary, always be on the brink of another necessary intervention. This isn't about blaming one administration or another. This is about the deep state, the permanent government, the institutional memory that outlasts any presidency, any election cycle. It's about a self-reinforcing echo chamber where narratives are recycled, fears are amplified, and alternatives are systematically sidelined. The crisis now, this slow-motion train wreck of negotiations with Iran, is a crisis of credibility. The architects of this narrative, those who have profited from its continuation, are finding themselves increasingly exposed. The public, you, are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. The old magic is fading. They are caught, you see, between the rhetoric they've spun for decades and a world that simply isn't playing by their rules anymore. They've defined Iran as an enemy so thoroughly, so uncompromisingly, that any path to genuine lasting peace becomes a betrayal of their own narrative. And yet, the constant saber-rattling, the perpetual state of near war, it's exhausting, it's expensive, and frankly, it's beginning to look less like statesmanship and more like a desperate attempt to cling to a fading script. By the time you finish this video, you will understand not just the mechanics of the US-Iran nuclear talks, but the deeper, more profound truth about how power operates in the 21st century. You will see the blueprint of manufactured consent laid bare, and you will understand why your skepticism, your critical eye, is not just a right, but a vital necessity for the future of our democracy. Let's pull back the curtain. Imagine a vast, intricate machine. Its gears are intelligence reports, diplomatic cables, media briefings, think tank analyses. Its fuel is public anxiety. Its output, a carefully curated perception of reality. And at the heart of this machine for decades has been the Iran problem. The former Pentagon official, let's call him Source Delta for discretion, didn't just see the machine, he helped build some of its components. He watched from the inside as the Iran threat evolved from a legitimate concern after the revolution into something far more elastic. A geopolitical Swiss Army knife, capable of justifying sanctions, military buildups, regional alliances, and even, at times, a convenient distraction from other, less palatable issues. He described the nuclear talks not as a genuine pursuit of disarmament, but as a critical node in this machine, a necessary theatrical performance. Think of it as a perennial renewal of a subscription service, where the product isn't the solution, but the problem itself. The talks, the constant tension, the brinkmanship. They legitimize the massive military presence in the Gulf. They solidify alliances with regional powers who fear Iran, and crucially, they maintain the narrative of American global leadership as the indispensable balancer of power. The goal, Source Delta revealed with a cynical laugh, was never zero centrifuges. It was always about managing the centrifuges, managing the perception of the centrifuges, managing the threat of the centrifuges. A nuclear Iran was always painted as the apocalypse, but privately many understood it as a useful boogeyman, a perpetual justification for interventionist foreign policy. He detailed how the negotiation table itself becomes a kind of crucible for public opinion. Every impasse, every walkout, every fiery pronouncement from Tehran or Washington is carefully framed. The media, often unknowingly, plays its part, amplifying the drama, focusing on the immediate crisis, rarely stepping back to question the underlying assumptions. This is not some grand conspiracy where everyone is in on it. It's far more insidious. It's a culture, an institutional inertia, a shared set of beliefs that dictate what is serious and what is fringe. And in this culture, questioning the fundamental nature of the Iran threat or the true purpose of the talks is considered naive, even dangerous. It's an accepted truth etched into the very bedrock of Washington's foreign policy establishment. Iran is the problem, and America must solve it, or at least be seen to be trying to solve it indefinitely. This wasn't just about the talks. This was about the entire ecosystem surrounding them. The sanctions, for instance. Source Delta explained how they became less about achieving specific behavioral changes in Tehran and more about projecting American power, signaling to allies and adversaries alike who calls the shots. They became an end unto themselves, a default mechanism of control, often with devastating humanitarian consequences that were conveniently downplayed or ignored in the official narrative. And the talks? They were the pressure valve. The occasional release of tension, a glimmer of hope that could be offered and then snatched away, maintaining a delicate balance, enough hope to prevent a complete collapse, enough friction to keep the threat alive. It's a masterstroke of geopolitical theater. He spoke of high-level meetings where the internal dialogue was starkly different from the public pronouncements. There was an understanding, he confided, that if Iran truly became a docile, integrated, non-threatening state overnight, a significant portion of our foreign policy infrastructure would lose its primary antagonist. What would we do then? Who would we rally against? What justification would there be for these enormous budgets, these strategic deployments? This is the self-made trap. They have spent so long demonizing Iran, so thoroughly woven the threat into the fabric of American foreign policy, that they can no longer pivot without dismantling a significant portion of their own power structure. They are prisoners of their own propaganda. And now the cracks are showing. You might think this is an isolated incident, a unique set of circumstances. But that's precisely the illusion. The playbook Source Delta described, this intricate dance of threat perception and managed crisis, isn't new. It's a recurring pattern, a deeply ingrained habit of power. We have seen the script before. We have lived through these cycles, often without fully recognizing the architecture behind them. Consider the Cold War. For decades, the Soviet Union was the monolithic, existential threat, an empire of evil, a global communist conspiracy. The narrative was pervasive, undeniable. It justified massive military spending, proxy wars across the globe, domestic surveillance, and an entire ideological apparatus designed to maintain fear and vigilance. The very thought of genuine détente, beyond carefully managed summits, was often viewed with suspicion. To question the Soviet threat was to be soft, perhaps even a traitor. They created an enemy, a necessary other, against which America could define itself. And this enemy, even when internally crumbling, served a vital external purpose. It maintained a certain power dynamic, a certain way of doing business in Washington. But then, almost overnight, the Soviet Union collapsed, the monolithic threat dissolved, and what followed? A period of geopolitical disorientation. A scramble to redefine purpose. New threats had to be identified, new narratives constructed, new reasons for the vast machinery of national security to continue its churn. Then came the War on Terror, another amorphous, elusive enemy. Al-Qaeda, then ISIS, then various permutations. An enemy without a state, a hydra-headed beast that could justify interventions anywhere, anytime. The fear was palpable. The justification for expansive powers, for endless wars, was accepted. And again, the narrative was meticulously crafted, amplified by a media eager for compelling stories, a public reeling from tragedy and desperate for security. Remember the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? The ironclad intelligence? The dire warnings of a mushroom cloud over American cities? We were told with unwavering certainty that Saddam Hussein possessed WMDs, that he posed an immediate threat. that invasion was not just advisable, but imperative. The evidence we now know was flimsy at best, actively manipulated at worst. But the narrative was so powerful, so relentlessly asserted, that it swept aside dissent, marginalized critics, and propelled a nation into a catastrophic war. They told us it was about freedom. They told us it was about security. They told us it was about stopping a madman. And millions believed, because the institutions, the powerful voices, the accepted experts, all spoke in unison. They manufactured consent. They painted a picture so vivid, so terrifying, that alternative perspectives seemed not just wrong, but irresponsible. And here we are again with Iran, the same echoes, the same drumbeat of inevitability, the same framing of an intractable problem requiring constant vigilance, constant pressure, constant negotiation that never quite resolves. For decades, this playbook worked. It was effective because the channels of information were largely controlled. A few major networks, a handful of newspapers, government press briefings, that was the information ecosystem. If the powerful asserted a truth, it was amplified, unchallenged, accepted. But then something began to unravel. Slowly at first, then with accelerating speed. The internet, the rise of social media, the explosion of independent media. The very tools that were supposed to connect us, to democratize information, also began to expose the seams in the carefully woven tapestry of official narratives. People started talking to each other. They started cross-referencing. They started seeing the inconsistencies, the repeated patterns, the convenient omissions. They witnessed the aftermath of previous truths, the WMDs that never materialized, the nation-building projects that failed, the endless wars with no clear objectives. The public you began to develop a collective scar tissue, a deep, abiding skepticism. Source Delta put it bluntly, the old magic trick relies on a captive audience. But that audience isn't captive anymore. They can change the channel. They can fact-check. They can find alternative voices. And once the trust is gone, once people start to see the strings, the puppet show loses its power. They've stopped buying the illusion. They've stopped accepting the accepted truths without scrutiny. They've stopped letting the talking heads on cable news dictate their reality. This isn't just about apathy. It's about a fundamental shift in perception. It's a rebellion of belief. Think about it. When an anonymous former Pentagon official like Source Delta comes forward, not to spread conspiracy theories, but to lay bare the operational logic of how power really works, it resonates precisely because people are primed for it. They've seen enough to know that the official story is often incomplete, often self-serving. This is why the Iran nuclear talks are different this time. The old script, the predictable dance of crisis and negotiation, is playing out on a stage where the audience is no longer passively accepting. They are dissecting, they are criticizing, they are sharing. The cost of maintaining the illusion is rising. The contradictions are becoming too glaring. The public weariness of perpetual conflict, of endless resource drains, is reaching a breaking point. The moral authority, once a bedrock of American foreign policy, has been eroded by years of misdirection and broken promises. This isn't just a tactical problem for Washington. This is an existential crisis for a particular way of wielding power. Because power, as we are now seeing, is fundamentally rooted in something far more intangible than missiles or economic might. It's rooted in belief. This brings us to the core thesis. The fundamental truth that Source Delta emphasized with such conviction, power, in its most profound and enduring form, is the control of belief. Think about it. Empires rise and fall not just because of military might, but because people either believe in their legitimacy, their narrative, their vision, or they don't. Economies thrive or collapse based on collective confidence, on shared belief in a currency, a market, a system. Wars are fought not just with bullets, but with ideas, with narratives that motivate soldiers to fight and populations to sacrifice. If you can control what people believe about the world, about who the enemies are, what the stakes truly are, what the necessary solutions entail, then you control their actions, their allegiances, their very sense of reality. The architects of the old playbook understood this implicitly. They understood that the most potent weapon isn't a bomb. It's a story. A compelling, emotionally resonant story that simplifies complex realities, assigns clear heroes and villains, and points towards an inevitable, necessary course of action. They spent decades perfecting this art. They built institutions around it, intelligence agencies that provided the facts, media outlets that disseminated the truths, think tanks that generated the analysis, and political figures who articulated the vision, all working consciously or unconsciously to reinforce the dominant worldview. And in this worldview, the United States was the indispensable nation. Its motives pure, its interventions necessary, its leadership unquestionable. Any challenge to this worldview is not just an intellectual disagreement, it was a threat to national security, a dangerous deviation from the accepted reality. This is why the Iran narrative became so crucial. It was one of the pillars of the post-Cold War order, providing a convenient and endlessly renewable source of threat perception that justified American global reach. It allowed for the exercise of power without always having to resort to overt military action, through the softer power of sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and narrative control. But here's the brutal reality they are now confronting. When the belief erodes, the power wanes. When the story no longer rings true, when the audience sees the artifice, the control slips away. They can issue all the declarations they want. They can sanction all the entities they can find. They can convene all the talks they desire. But if the people no longer believe the foundational myth that Iran is an unqualified apocalyptic threat that only they can manage, then the very basis of their power begins to crumble. This isn't merely about policy failure. It's about a crisis of legitimacy. It's about the underlying architecture of global power being shaken to its very foundations. This is a civilizational pivot moving from an era where information was scarce and controlled to an era where it is abundant and contested. And in that contest, the old masters of belief control are finding themselves at a profound disadvantage. What we are witnessing with the US-Iran talks is a microcosm of this larger global struggle. It's a test case. Can the old guard reassert its control over belief? Or has the public, finally, learned to write its own story? So, what does this mean for you? For us? If power truly equals the control of belief, then the most potent act of citizenship, the most vital exercise of democratic agency, becomes skepticism. Not cynicism, not blind rejection, but a healthy, informed, critical questioning of every narrative presented as immutable truth. This is the democratic turn. This is where we become the corrective force. When institutions, even well-intentioned ones, become insulated, when they operate on accepted truths that benefit their own perpetuation, they lose touch with the very people they are meant to serve. They begin to manufacture consent, to craft stories that justify their existence, their budgets, their interventions. But a healthy democracy, a truly vibrant society, demands something more. It demands a populace capable of independent thought, of discerning facts from spin, of questioning authority not out of malice, but out of a profound commitment to truth and justice. This is not about denying facts. It's about demanding all the facts. It's about demanding all the facts. It's not about rejecting expertise. It's about seeking diverse expertise, especially from those outside the echo chambers of power. Source Delta, the former Pentagon official, didn't offer a specific policy solution for Iran. His profound contribution was to expose the method of power. He reminded us that the very act of scrutinizing, of digging deeper, of refusing to accept convenient narratives is an act of profound democratic courage. When the public collectively begins to question, to demand transparency, to hold power accountable not just for its actions, but for the stories it tells, that's when true change becomes possible. That's when the self-made traps begin to crumble. That's when the old playbook stops working. We've seen this before in different contexts. The anti-war movements that eventually shifted public opinion on Vietnam, these were not just battles of policy. They were battles of narrative, battles of belief. They succeeded because ordinary people, refused to accept the dominant story. The stakes are immense. This isn't just about the arcane details of centrifuges and enriched uranium. This is about whether we, as a democratic society, are capable of navigating a complex world with our eyes wide open, or whether we will remain perpetual consumers of carefully constructed illusions. It's about whether we allow a small, insulated elite to dictate our fears and our futures, or whether we reclaim our collective power to discern, to question, and to demand truth. Your curiosity, your critical thinking, your willingness to look behind the curtain, these are the most powerful forces for change in the modern world. Embrace them, cultivate them, because the future of our democracy, and indeed the very nature of truth itself, depends on it. So, the next time you hear a headline about the US-Iran nuclear talks, the next time you see a politician or an expert confidently declare an immutable truth about a global crisis, I want you to remember what you've learned today. Remember the words of the former Pentagon official, that the crisis itself can be a commodity, that the narrative can be more important than the reality, that power thrives on controlling what you believe. The challenge before us is not just to understand the complexities of foreign policy, but to understand the mechanics of information itself, to recognize when a story is being told, and to ask who is telling it, why, and what purpose does it truly serve. This isn't about becoming cynical about everything. It's about becoming discerning about everything. It's about developing the intellectual muscle to sift through the noise, to identify the patterns, and to demand deeper truths. The architects of the old playbook are indeed caught in a trap of their own making, where their historical narratives clash with a newly empowered, newly skeptical public. And you are the force that is holding them accountable. You are the reason the old magic is fading. This conversation, this vital dissection of power, doesn't end here. It begins here. It continues in your questions, in your discussions, in your relentless pursuit of truth. Don't let them tell you what to think. Don't let them control your belief. Don't let them define your reality. So, what do you think? Did the insights from this former Pentagon official resonate with your own observations? Have you noticed this pattern of narrative control in other areas of public life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this vital conversation going. Share this video if you believe others need to understand these dynamics. And if you want to stay ahead of the curve, if you want more insights into the hidden workings of power, the unvarnished truths behind the headlines, then be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning.